Today, despite the rain, here we are in Eyam at the museum. Famous, made by what novel the year had 12s have to study?
Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks.
So here we are
Australian
at
author.
And how do we pronounce the name? Eyam?
Eyam, I think.
And we're going to ask.
Well, what we've got in here, we've got a museum, and at about 3 o'clock in there, they're doing a film of the story.
Oh, cool.
So we'll look around the museum first. Yes, there's people coming.
So this is inside Eyam Museum. There is very little about this museum that I didn't love. Everything from the creepy mannequins to the little informational plaques that you could be found across the walls showing how people used to think they would be able to cure plague, to the exploding rats in the gift shop. I adored this little museum. I loved it. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Eyam, I highly recommend you jump online and research it a little bit because it's a fascinating and harrowing story. In fact, it was probably this that captured the imagination of award-winning Australian author Geraldine Brooks. Brooks actually spent several months, I think, living in Eyam as she completed research for her historical fiction novel, Year of Wonders. It's an amazing book and it's based on very real events that happen here in Eyam. So to give you a quick rundown, Eyam is a fairly remote village in Derbyshire, and although most people were aware of plague affecting London, remote communities such as Eyam were fairly safe. So it was a shock in 1665 when a flea-infested bundle of damp cloth claimed its first victim. This was George Vickers, the local tailor. As plague spread, Reverend William Mopesson and Puritan minister Thomas Stanley took charge and introduced a number of rules to try and curb the spread of the disease. These rules required families to bury their own dead and included things such as the relocation of church services to the natural amphitheatre in Cuckett so villagers could separate and not have to sit so close together. And the rules also dictated that the entire town would quarantine itself under the leadership of these two men. This was a huge sacrifice. Estimates differ, but some figures suggest that only 83 villages survived out of a population of 350. Some figures are different and suggest 430 survivors survived out of 800, but regardless of the exact figures, the devastation was widespread. This figure here represents the 76 houses or family groups recorded in the parish register at the time. The figures in red indicate victims of the plague, people that died of the plague. The figures in green represent people that survived. Blue are people that died during the plague but not of the plague. And the figures in yellow are people that they're not really sure what happened to them. Maybe survived, but there's no recorded death of those people. In order to receive goods, villagers placed a list with coins at the boundary stone. Holes were drilled into the stone and filled with vinegar to disinfect coins. Someone from a neighbouring village would then come and collect their list and the money and leave the goods. Some stories about families in Eyam are heartbreaking. You can imagine children surviving parents, parents surviving the rest of their children and then having to bury them themselves. There are stories like this all over Eyam.
This is where it began. This is where George Vickers was.
So this is the church. This is where the villagers would have gathered to celebrate church services, weddings, funerals, baptisms, before the plague forced them to make the decision to gather in the alternate location of Couplet Delph. This is the Eyam church. And look up here on the walls. Here is a Saxon font in the church at Eyam, and you can see the story again behind there. But this is a functioning church. This church is still used for services, and over there you can actually see there's a cake competition. They're all cakes, those little models of houses. So you can see parts of the church that were originally here. This wing that we're standing in has been added on later. So the original church would have just been the middle bit here. And so this is Catherine Montpesson. Is that how you say it? Montpesson. And Geraldine Brooks turned her into Eleanor in the book. And here's the grave. There is an inscription, but it's kind of worn away. So as you can see, it was a pretty rainy day, the day we visited Eyam, but we could not go before visiting what is now known as the Riley Graves. The story of the Talbots and Hancocks tells just one tale of extreme tragedy, and we didn't want to leave Eyam without visiting their graves, as I said, the Riley Graves. They can be found just outside the town, near the top of Riley Lane, and that is how they got their name. Perhaps Elizabeth Hancock and her family thought they would be safe living away from the village, but it wasn't to be. The first Talbot was buried on July 5th, and there was only one survivor out of a family of 13. Elizabeth Hancock buried her husband and 6 children in the space of just 8 days. She dragged them one by one as they died across a field and buried them in the spot that you're about to see. And as per the rules, she buried them herself. There are tales of an onlooker that watched her do this. However, he was too scared to intervene and help. We've just walked about 350 metres from where the road goes up to the Riley Graves, and you can see that in the paddock there that we're heading towards. I usually hate the cold. I'm not cold right now. I've got all my wet weather gear on. But I'm really excited to see this after having taught it, having read Geraldine Brooks' fictional historical fiction book about the area about 4 times now. Yeah, that's it, buddy. A beautiful view. Oh, here we go.
So she dragged them all the way from the... What did they go?
No, buddy, that's her track. Here they are. So if you look closely, you can see the name Hancock. Not quite sure whose this one is. It's a bit hard to read in the rain.
I think it was the husband.
To have a big family myself and have 5 children of my own, it's just devastating, but that's what lots of families had to do. Just to think of how this woman must have grieved up here as she buried each one, and she survived. She ended up moving away from the area once she buried the last one and going to live with her surviving son, who was away at the time in another town. I think a lot of tears were probably shed in this spot. Another perspective of where the graves are and where the homestead is. And there are people living in there today. It's private property. But this woman, who was probably weak and frail herself, dragged all their children across that field to bury them herself. And while some of them were dying, she would have been caring for the sick while trying to bury the dead. What did they say? It was like over the space of 8 days that she buried them all?
Yeah, I think so. A week. It was almost like they said in the film that she did it once a day.
Yeah, once a day almost she was burying someone. Alright, now the walk back in the rain. I hope you enjoyed this video about Eyam, the real Eyam. It was definitely a really moving experience for us. I do want to say that on the long walk back from the Riley graves, it did make me ponder about the devastation that hit the Indigenous Australians during colonisation when they were all struck with smallpox, another deadly disease. But I'm really glad that we had this experience and were able to see some of the realities of this little village, the plague village. Thanks for watching.